Once greatest and freest of living creatures, the whale today finds new boundaries in the sea. Across the fishing nets off the Newfoundland coast, man and peaceful beast again are rivals for their daily food.
The collisions that whales have with fishing gear probably are true accidents. The fact that the capelin is swimming ahead of them and the whale is more or less blinded by the school of capelin, so all of a sudden the capelin swim into the net.
Snared in the meshes, a humpback whale struggles to break free. If he fails, he may die with the net as a tangled shroud. If he succeeds, the net will be torn or swept away. For the hard-working fisherman, a net damaged is time and income lost at the peak of the fishing season. In the coastal villages, members of the Calypso team find a deep and frustrated anger against an adversary robbing the families of their livelihood.
When the whales are coming down in a bay like that, they are chasing capelin?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. Capelin and squid.
And squid also. And sometimes they get caught in your net?
Yeah.
And that's big trouble, huh?
Big trouble.
At the end of its long journey from the Great Lakes to the sea, the St. Lawrence River at last enters a world without edges, a watery domain in which all things are blurred and ships seem no more than phantoms. As Cousteau keeps vigil on Calypso's bridge, the helmsman steers a course he cannot see. Only the radar's probing impulse and the dialogue of ship's horn and shore buoy give space a dimension and shape. Here off Newfoundland's coast, the confluence of the cold Labrador Current and the warm Gulf Stream has created one of the great fishing areas of the world. Into this misty void for more than 5 centuries, the prodigious schools of cod, mackerel, haddock, and other species have brought the fishing fleets of nations from around the world. Led by Albert Falco, members of the Calypso team prepare to make a journey into the past. Labrador's Red Bay served as one of the earliest whaling stations on the Canadian coast. Here, the Calypso team ties the Zodiac to the research barge anchored above one of the first known wrecks in American waters. The Basque whaling galleon San Juan sunk at a depth of 40 feet in the year 1565. In the clear, icy waters of the bay, the divers descend to the site not far offshore, where the 400-year-old ship now lies exposed. With silt and debris pulled away by suction pumps, overlaid by aluminum framing for easier systematic study. Each board and fragment can be identified and labeled. Now occupied by later stowaways, the oak planks and even the staves of its ruptured barrels have been remarkably preserved during the ship's long centuries of oblivion by the fine silt, the protected position, and the frigid waters of the Labrador Current. Meticulously, a Canadian marine archaeologist makes notes describing each artifact, its precise location, and presumed function. Beneath the cameraman's lights, the shape and dimensions of the ancient whaler are clearly indicated. But distant archives in Spain reveal even more. From 16th century insurance claims, it is now clear what happened in that fateful autumn of 1565. Fully loaded with barrels of whale oil and rock ballast, ready to fight off pirates with cannon and crossbows, the ship was about to set sail with her precious cargo when a sudden storm slammed her against the rocks and sank her, a ship and a season's work almost totally lost. Back from the frigid depths, Falco and his teammates find a darkling world in many ways little changed since the San Juan went down. As a retrieved plank from the hull is brought to the surface, the chief of the underwater recovery team, Dr. Robert Grenier, talks of their findings to the Calypso divers.
C'était apparemment un baleinier basque qui était tout prêt à partir pour l'Espagne, probablement l'automne.
As an example of 16th century shipbuilding, says Dr. Grenier, the sunken Basque whaler is a particularly interesting archaeological find.
Les types d'architecture navale à l'époque, quelle sorte de bateaux les baleiniers basques utilisaient. D'après les dimensions approximées.
According to the approximate dimensions found on the seabed, the San Juan was unusually large for the time, with a weight of about 300 tons. On the map, he indicates the site of the wreck, deep and close to shore, an ideal place to bring in whale carcasses for processing. Excavations at the site of the whaling station ashore are described by archaeologist Dr. Jim Tuck.
As many different kinds of structures as possible. A structure in the background here is an oven where the whale fat was rendered into oil.
Do you know why they chose this place?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. First, of course, it's a good spot for whales. That's the prime consideration, I guess. But it's the harbor, it's probably the best harbor on the coast for many miles in either direction. They chose always to settle on the inside of islands rather than the seaside or in sheltered spots on the mainland, and always where there's deep water. So they could roll a carcass of a whale or tow the carcass of a whale right in here, do their cutting in or butchering very near the shore, chop up the blubber and mince it, put it in barrels, and then put it in the ovens with a minimum of dragging things around.
Yet the centuries have taken their toll. For unnumbered generations, the humpback has followed the ancestral pathways on its yearly migrations to calve in the warm Caribbean, then returned to the Arctic in early summer. But in more recent times, the pathway often has become a gauntlet, and not for the whale alone. Visited by Cusто, Funk Island's slab of rock marks a lonely intersection in the history of man and other species. Here, Jacques Cartier, discoverer of the St. Lawrence, in 1534 made his first landfall along the Canadian coast. Here, 200 years later, trapped and clubbed to extinction, the last great auk vanished forever. Here today, murre from all parts of the Arctic find a protected breeding ground. Though the island is shared with other birds during the breeding weeks, the murre are by far the dominant group. 1 million birds often crowded 50 to the square yard. In midsummer, with the young chicks still unable to fly, the murre will leave the island in a vast flotilla as they begin their return migration to the Arctic. Unlike their cousins, the penguins, the adult murre are strong flyers when airborne. Yet because of their bulky bodies, they have trouble getting off the ground. With a little running start, the birds launch themselves into the air, falling for a short distance before they can begin to gain altitude. Some don't succeed on the first attempt and fall into the sea, must laboriously climb back to the top of the island and try all over again. Funk Island is but one of several interlocking habitats of air, land, and water. As Calypso stands offshore, the diving saucer with Colin Monnier and Falco aboard is readied for a journey into the cold waters of the Labrador Current. Given Calypso's bearing, Falco sets the gyro to coordinate the saucer's movement with that of the ship. At last, the saucer enters that hidden domain where space is defined in water instead of air, and strange organisms hang like constellations in the night. Out of the darkness, like some incandescent celestial body, a jellyfish comes into view, hovers briefly near the saucer, then sinks away. At the drop of the continental shelf, other creatures wait. Here the cod, perhaps the most hunted quarry of the Newfoundland fisheries, swim by the sunken walls of the shelf, canyons carved in Earth's remote geologic past, ledges dotted with scattered anemones. Feather stars, like ferns of light in the Stygian gloom, waver in the saucer's passing. Far below, the voyagers find the seafloor covered with jagged rock, shattered by icebergs, scraping the bottom as they rise and fall in the ocean swells. Leaving the cold black depths, the diving saucer starts the long journey upward, rising again through a sea that suddenly glistens, starlit by great swarms of phosphorescent organisms. Then abruptly, the saucer and its occupants are back in the familiar world of the surface, met by friendly teammates who shepherd them back to Calypso.
L'eau zéro bâbord. L'eau zéro bâbord. Là, si vous êtes accroché au nylon, tapez partout, hein. C'est parti.
Alors, eh bien, c'est intéressant, là, au point de vue géologique surtout. Il y a des grandes vallées profondes.
Released from the saucer, Falco reports to Cusто that though there were a few scattered cod and other marine life, the most interesting discovery was the geological activity beneath the sea, the rocks pounded to fragments by the passing icebergs.
Par contre, les vallées peu profondes, ça se termine par des petites falaises et on voit très bien que des icebergs ont cassé le caillou tout le long.
Ah bon?
Ah oui, ça se voit très bien, c'est très net.
Year by year, broken from the vast glaciers of Greenland and the Arctic coasts of Canada, the icebergs drift southward in stately procession, huge floating islands, endangering Atlantic ship routes and fishermen's vessels along the Grand Banks. The elemental forces of geology, the severity of climate, and the hardships of the sea have, at least until recent times, provided a form of protection for much of Newfoundland's rugged domain. As Calypso enters one of the fjords that indent the coast, it finds a land still much as it was discovered by the early explorers. A flight of the Calypso helicopter soon discloses a terrain in which man is still an alien presence. A primeval landscape in which its traditional occupants still exercise their territorial claims. Here, moose and other wild creatures can still raise their young in relative tranquility. Here, at least, in Earth's shrinking spaces, man has not yet crowded a fellow tenant off the planet. Aboard Calypso, the divers prepare another excursion. Unlike the creatures of the wild, man is not the prisoner of a single environment, confined to terrestrial exploration. With his machines and technology, he can cross the thresholds of worlds other than his own. Borne by the Labrador Current, a small iceberg has drifted not far offshore. Now in the Zodiac, two of the Calypso divers, Raymond Cole and Bruno Capello, prepare to explore the wilderness that lies below the surface of the sea. With 8/9 of its weight below the surface, the submerged bulk of an iceberg sometimes extends hundreds of feet into the depths.
As the divers descend, the lights at first reveal only the frozen white wall and green water. Then abruptly a lion's mane or stinging jellyfish appears like a stain against the gleaming ice. Like some magician of the deep, changing contours in an endless metamorphosis, the great creature trails a 10-foot veil of poison filaments, the deadly threats by which it traps and paralyzes its prey. Beneath the iceberg, hidden in the darkness, the sea floor seems an endless plain of flatfish. Long evolved so that both protruding eyes are on one side of the head, they lie in endless, watchful silence. Yet startled by the diver's lights, there is a sudden undulating movement. Then, as the stalked eyes gleam against the darkness, others begin to move until at last the whole bottom ripples with the soundless flight of escaping flatfish. The fleeing flatfish startle another truculent scavenger of the bottom, the ugly horned fish, the sculpin. Unloved by fishermen, the sculpin is both inedible and hazardous to catch, for its teeth and raised spikes can inflict a painful wound. Yet, in this theater of the deep, there are other grotesques as well. The red scorpionfish, the wolf eel, half fish and half moray eel, with jaws so powerful that it can crush clams and other mollusks, is also feared by fishermen. Lying in its lair, another death's head apparition waits for possible prey. Across the crowded stage, a lobster stalks by, still dragging wisps of a net encountered in some other time and place. Again, the quarrelsome sculpin is quick to take offense.
Later, marine biologist Don Peer describes the sculpin's vocal vocabulary.
Longhorn sculpin, Myoxocephalus, Oxodesmos spinosus. You can perhaps hear him now, can you? He isn't growling yet.
Ce poisson-là, on l'entend sous l'eau. Il grogne.
Caught in a summer storm off the coast, Calypso labors through heavy seas. Yet it is only a ghost of the gills that assail these waters in the winter months, when Arctic winds whip the seas into a towering violence. Along the coast, along many a spit of land or shallows, the ocean fist has left its mark. Here on one of the offshore islands, the helicopter discovers the stranded hull of a one-time Liberty ship lifted bodily ashore by 70 to 80-foot waves, mute evidence of the power of the sea. In its journey, the Calypso has found traveling companions. With the new calves born in the Caribbean, the humpbacks pause for a little while to feast on the capelin and other fish of the Grand Banks. But quickly, compelled by forces far older than themselves, they will continue their migratory journey. By August, the whale calves will enter Arctic waters for the first time. Once a center for the great fleet of sailing ships that came from Europe to fish the Grand Banks, the islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon remain a tiny vestigial holding of France's one-time vast colonies in North America. Approaching Saint-Pierre, capital and only city in the island's 93 square miles, Calipso raises its flag for arrival. Soon thereafter, the harbor pilot comes aboard to guide the ship through the maze of channels and shallows outside the port.
Bonjour. Bonjour, commandant. Bonjour. Voilà, le commandant. Non, 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 bonjour, commandant. Vous, j'ai pas besoin avec mon prénom pour vous connaître. Bienvenue à bord. Merci. Bienvenue à Saint-Pierre. D'accord. Merci. C'est la première fois. Oui, ben, on vous connaît très bien ici, il n'y a pas de problème. Et on est arrivé avec le moteur.
Welcome to the bridge. The pilot agrees with Custot that it is an astonishing sunny day for a region more often fog-bound during these summer months.
Ah, c'est des vents.
Later, Custot reveals he has come to visit the island's famed wrecks. Well, says the pilot, we have a lot of them. In the local museum, the mayor shows Custot photographs and artifacts of the island's long history of marine disaster.
Depuis 1790.
Alors, tous ces bateaux qui se sont jetés sur la côte, c'est à cause du mauvais temps, à cause d'erreurs de navigation, à cause de quoi?
Lying on the heavily traveled approaches to the St. Lawrence River, the island's waters are littered with the remains of no fewer than 650 ships wrecked since the 16th century.
Qui s'est échoué en 1916. Le jour où ce bateau s'est échoué, le temps était beau, seulement il y avait du brouillard. 7 bateaux se sont échoués, celui-là a été chargé de bois, c'était un Norvégien.
7 bateaux le même jour?
7 bateaux le même jour.
Et celui-là, là-bas?
Alors, les 3 là, ça s'est passé à l'automne 1932. Ouais.
Lost in storm or run aground in fog-bound waters, once as many as 7 in a single day, the ships soon became centers of accumulating sand deposits.
Il est resté dans la vase, comme qu'il lui a fait un lit. Il est resté là-bas droit, il n'a pas gité.
Et celui-là, là en bas, qu'est-ce que c'est?
Alors ça, c'est un bateau qui s'est perdu avant 1900 sur la côte de l'Anglade. La nature ici a fait autre chose.
Over the centuries, the carcasses of the lost vessels have become the ribs of a new isthmus, which did not exist before.
Qui se sont terminés souvent par des drames, des tragédies, des actes d'héroïsme aussi.
Later, Cousteau directs preparations for an examination of one of the more recent casualties of the sea.
Il faudra garder les moteurs en route parce que faut se méfier d'un révolin qui pourrait nous renvoyer.
Determined that Calypso shall not be added to the list, he cautions the crew as they fix the ship's position close to shore.
Il y a Raymond qui est parti devant.
Voilà, vous pouvez arrêter la machine. Et gardez les moteurs naturellement.
Oui, bien sûr.
Ça peut
rien.
Laissez aller si ça part. Hein. Allez, donnez du mou, donnez du mou, donnez du mou, donnez du mou.
Là, ça va, c'est bon. Voilà, ça va.
Stoppé.
Là, il faut tout stopper. Voilà.
C'est allumé, non? C'est là que j'ai essayé.
Aboard Calypso, Falco, Cole, and Delamotte prepare their descent into the treacherous currents of the Straits of Langlade that swirl about the wreck. Swept against the rocks by storm, a great Swedish cargo ship now lies in 70 feet of water. Its broken propeller, a forgotten memento of man's long and troubled history with the sea. Silent aliens, the divers glide past broken gear and shattered decks. Yet, as always with man's crumbling structures, nature tries to see what can be done with them. Upon the bare ribs and rusting filigree of iron, fresh algae and weeds have found anchor. Out of the decaying hulk, she has created a garden in the sea. But of any other life, there is no sign. Baffled by their fruitless quest, the divers emerge from the wreck. Already, despite their suits, the frigid temperatures of the Newfoundland waters have begun to invade their bones. Chilled, they eagerly return to the surface.
Alors? C'est vide, hein? Elle est vide. Quoi, elle est pas? Ouais. Ils ont tous sorti. Il n'y a plus de poissons, il n'y a plus rien.
Shirtless on deck, Cusто jokes with his shivering comrades, remarks how warm it is in the sunshine. But Falco replies that his feet are so cold, his stiffened toes can hardly follow him.
Les doigts de pied suivent difficilement. Les doigts de pied suivent difficilement. Au bout des palmes.
It is then that Falco reports their puzzling discovery. In a wreck which ordinarily attracts and shelters various aquatic species, at the peak of the season in waters famed for the richness of their marine life, the divers have seen no fish at all. With Don Pierre and Dr. Forrest of the Saint Pierre Fisheries, Cusто discusses the mystery of the absent fish. He suggests the possibility that the fish, even at the height of the season, must come in great schools or waves with barren intervals between.
Si dans cette espèce de désert pour les plongeurs, tout d'un coup il n'arrivait pas une horde de poissons, des arrivages massifs d'une espèce, et puis l'espèce s'en va, et une autre espèce arrive, etc. C'est pas comme ça que ça se passe. C'est un peu ça.
Forrest agrees that there are pauses, at least between species. The squid, he says, are about to come, and after them, the dominant species, the cod. The great trawler fleets, whose nets bring in massive catches, pass through the pauses without strain. But for the solitary fishermen who put out to sea morning after morning, time lost is a worrisome thing. Without capital reserves, their fortunes rise and fall from day to day. Their craft now fitted with motors instead of oars. The fishermen from the local villages or outports still go to sea in the narrow, sharp-prowed dories used since the days of sailing ships. Though many set nets, others still fish by line. Carrying rows of hooks, the lines are a more discriminating method than the trawler nets, bringing in better fish with far less waste or destruction to the habitat. Armed with little more than a compass, the dorymen are accustomed to working in fog-bound waters that leave them all but blind. Caught in a sudden storm or other mishap far from home, they regularly run the risk of becoming a new statistic in the long roll of human casualties at sea. Weighed ashore, the doryman's catch may bring a varying price, near 20 cents a pound. Yet on the European markets, housewives will pay 20 times as much. A staggering disproportion of income between middleman, retailer, and the hard-working fishermen who take the risks. The whale's economy is more direct. What matters is not price, but availability. At the moment, the whales are joyously feeding on the newly arrived squid. Nearby, man too is fishing for squid, and almost as efficiently as the whales, which take them in vast mouthfuls. Observed by Calypso divers, he uses a new method developed by the Japanese, the so-called squid pump, which has come into common use. By this system, twin lines are lowered into the depths and immediately reeled in, bringing an instant and continuous catch. The trick is quite elementary and openly sexist. At each barbless hook is a lure resembling a female squid. Now, in their spawning period, the free-swimming squid approach the assumed female, expecting to mate, but instead are simply hooked. A radical lowering of expectations, not always confined to the squid. Caught, the squid in reflex resort to the only defense they know. They discharge a cloud of ink, sometimes useful in making a quick escape. But for these, it is far too late. Within 2 hours, the boat is filled with its new catch, and the ink simply discharged by bilge pump. The sea's saddest story of unconsummated love. But for the whales, a much more dangerous presence has now appeared. From the larger fishing vessels, stationary nets are released to form great mile-long walls beneath the surface. No longer made of cotton or more breakable strands, these new nylon nets can snare even whales. Anchored to the bottom and hung from floating buoys, the thousands of nets form a vast system of barriers that may extend more than 20 miles offshore. Even Calypso, following the whales, is caught in the endless labyrinth. Aided by a watchful call on the bridge, the helmsman tries to avoid fouling the nets as he threads a zigzag course among the endless array of buoys that lie across his path.
On est entouré de bouées. Bon, tu vas à droite maintenant.
Yet beneath the surface, the nets are hidden walls of death, designed to trap the most edible and valuable species, the mackerel, the haddock, and the cod. Caught in the mesh, their struggles only tighten their imprisonment, until at last each is merely another gasping victim in the endless barrier. Attended by the circling birds, a group of fishermen slowly haul in the great net with its cargo of dead or struggling fish. Now a larger victim is discovered. A humpback whale blows and thrashes at the surface. Entangled in a twisted net, it is held fast by the anchor cable. While the Calypso divers reconnoiter below, Dr. John Lynn, head of a whale research group, attempts a rescue at the surface, trying urgently to cut the restraining web, a procedure usually less costly both for whale and fisherman. Killed by an angry fisherman's gun, the humpback, unlike other whales, simply sinks to the bottom, making recovery of the net certainly impossible. As the rescue effort continues, a weary falco returns to the Zodiac and reports the net is completely destroyed. Later, after the humpback has been successfully released, Dr. Lin tells of his group's progress in helping both whales and fishermen.
This year, how many whales approximately have you taken out nets?
Gosh, let me think. We've probably hit on the order of 45 calls so far this year. We'll probably have double that number throughout the summer. Most of them do get away alive. I think the ratio is something on the order, with us helping them, and the order is 5 to 1.
But back in the harbor, as the fishermen clean their catch, Delamont finds a more skeptical attitude.
You have seen the whales on the net today? You have seen the whale?
Oh yeah,
Whales on the net today? Is that the big trouble for you?
Oh yeah, it's a problem, but not as big a damage as the crab, you know?
Uh-huh. What are you doing normally when you have a whale in your net?
But mostly they take the net and go over them.
What?
They take the net and go over them most of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, what we're trying to do is give techniques so that the fishermen can release their own whales. It happens commonly enough that we can't afford to send divers out from St. John's. So the fishermen have to learn to do it themselves. And what we've been developing is ways to work from their fishing boats right from the water surface. One of the dangers for the fishermen is that the whales, once they're tangled up, they keep towing gear and they catch more gear, and it's not uncommon for the same whale to have the fishing gear from 5 or 6 different fishermen and towing it along in the bay. So it's very important from the point of view of the fisherman to get the whale out of the gear and have him swimming some other place. And it's also very important from the point of view of the whale.
Well, I think they're a nuisance. I think there should be something done about them.
You feel like killing them, you do, yeah.
There's a lot of frustration, and a guy get pretty mad about it, eh? And the first thing some guy think about, sometimes he want to shoot the damn thing.
The collisions are increasing in frequency, there's no question about that. The capelin bait offshore has been depleted, so the whales have to come inshore to feed on this bait. And that is a primary factor increasing whales inshore.
What's the solution for the future?
Well, one of the things that Canada has done, which is part of the solution, is not to fish capelin on the Grand Banks. Once that capelin stock replenishes, there'll be more food for the whales, and they'll move off to traditional feeding grounds. The humpback fishes in the same area as our fishermen do. These are the inshore fishermen. These humpback whales come in the same fishing grounds. They key their fishery on the same bait. The capelin makes the world go round.
Born to be common prey, the capelin must replenish itself to play its sacrificial role. Here on the beaches below these headlands, the small silvery fish perform a yearly ritual. Like a vast, insistent tide, the capelin come to spawn in the shallows and are often swept ashore in great windrows of dying fish. Spent, their 2-year assignment of life now past, The water teems with ghostly schools of dead fish, now food for all the scavengers that roam the bottom of the sea. For the few short weeks of the spawning run, the capelin are met by crowds of island householders on the beaches, often filling a single cast of the net with more than a man can carry. Even in death, the capelin has endless uses. In the small garden plots of the island folk, worked in with peat or straw, the small fish for 3 centuries have enriched the thin soil of Newfoundland. And still they come. Pursued by predators, they race to perform a last supreme act of life before they die. Soon, cleansed by crab and bird and tide, the beaches will bear no trace of this annual migration into death. But already the golden spawn will have returned to sea, there to await another year, another tide. The fishing runs of the Grand Banks draw many hunters, but none more deadly than this, the trawler. From at least a dozen nations in North America, Europe, and Asia, the great armadas come. Hundreds of trawlers, fitted with every modern device, sweeping the waters of the continental shelf. Opened and closed by the action of the great otter boards, the huge trawl nets are lowered at reduced speed and retrieved every 3 hours, day and night around the clock, regardless of the weather. While the helicopter hovers near the fishing vessel, Cusто and his companions follow in the Calypso, prepare to record the trawler's work. But in catching the fish, there is uncalculated damage to the undersea habitat as the otter boards scrape the ocean floor. Underway on its plotted course, the trawler pulls the net through the waters for the precisely allotted time. Aboard Calypso, Cusто and the divers, Jacques Delcouter, Raymond Cole, and Bernard Delamotte, stand by until at last the trawler captain signals that the net is about to be hauled aboard.
Bien compris, j'envoie les Zodiacs.
Again, the otter boards, the great gates of the net, are lifted from the sea as the divers prepare to descend. Then swiftly the ship's winches begin to pull in the net. Not far below the surface, For the first time, the divers glimpse the great extended pocket of the trawl net, filled now with its captive prey, living and dead. The net and its mixed catch are soon retrieved. As it is hoisted aboard, it spills some smaller fish, accidentally caught in mesh designed to catch only larger species. With practiced efficiency, the processing begins. The commercial fish are soon cleaned and prepared for the waiting market. The non-commercial, or so-called trash fish, which constitute approximately half of the average catch, are simply discarded and thrown into the sea, where the waiting birds have an orgy of feeding. It is, some naturalists contend, a prodigiously wasteful method of fishing. In rapid order, the deck is cleared and cleaned. Within minutes, minor tears in the net are mended. Quickly, in endless repetition, the trawler's net again will be lowered into the sea.
Always we have companions, the gulls and terns looking for an easy meal. Wheeling above us, the flocks sometimes seem almost a mirror reflection of the schools swimming in the sea below. Bird and fish, each captive of its separate element. Separate, yet bound each to each in nature's changing design. Each has an inner clock that sets the rhythms of its matings and migrations. A compass pointing the way across tundra and coast or the submerged valleys of the sea. Each must carry to generations not yet born its indispensable gift, life.
At the mouth of the St. Lawrence, even the wilderness reserves of Anticosti Island have become a battleground between man and rivals from the sea. Here, like a harbinger of the fate that awaits many a dying species, lies the hapless hulk of the Montebello. Driven aground by gale winds more than a half-century ago, she is now only a phantom ship, her vacant decks and rigging both death trap and nesting site for cormorants and other seabirds. Entering the wreck itself, passing slowly above its submerged lower deck, the Calypso team seems to have entered the high, vaulted space of a cathedral. Eroded by seas and weather, the interior has collapsed, leaving only a vast hollowed shell that echoes with the sounds of the Zodiac motor and the divers' voices. In the shallow waters, the dim daylight reveals the sunken working apparatus of the vessel. Here, the broken main shaft, winches, and deck gear decay in silent oblivion. Yet soon it becomes apparent what the real fate of the great ship has become. Here too, life has invaded its desolation. It is now a huge shelter for hundreds of lobsters that throng the offshore waters of Anticosti Island. Here, through thousands of years, feeding at night and hiding by day, the crustaceans maintained their numbers amid the hunting seals, whose lives followed a reverse pattern of foraging by day and resting by night. Today, for the wary crustaceans, a good hiding place is hard to find. Yet with thousands of traps scattered around the islands of St. Lawrence's Gulf, lobstermen complain of declining stocks. Ignoring their own overuse of a food resource, the lobster men have found a handy villain, the seal. Because of their increased numbers, and because a few have learned to plunder the lobster traps themselves, the Canadian government has offered a bounty for each gray seal killed. Today, paid $50 for a large jaw and $25 for a smaller one, licensed lobstermen butcher seals and can the meat for human consumption.
Là, nous autres, on fait la chasse aux phoques, puis après ça, on met ça en conseil. Là, on coupe tout ça en petits morceaux.
Vous vendez ça où?
Questioned by Bernard Delamotte, One hunter explains that with the addition of herbs and spices, the seal meat is made to taste like beef. The canned meat is sold in nearby towns or kept by the hunter for his own consumption. There is no quota, says the hunter. Depending on conditions year by year, he may kill as many as 60 seals in 2 or 3 weeks.
Dans 3 semaines, alors vous aurez tué environ combien de phoques?
On devrait calculer, c'est pas, ça dépend, on pourrait peut-être en tuer 60, ça peut dépendre, 20.
Alors, le travail continue ici, alors.
From another lobsterman, Delamont learns that the dressed jaws are sent on to a government laboratory. There, biologists determine the age of the killed seal, and payment is made accordingly. Though conceding the necessity for controls, some naturalists fear that the lobsterman may be punishing the seal as scapegoat for their own excesses, that in some not too distant future, both lobster and the seal may equally suffer a drastic reduction in numbers. A similar fate has overtaken the St. Lawrence's dazzling apparition, the beluga. Aboard Calypso, naturalist Dr. Jean Boulva explains that until recent years there were 5,000 beluga in the lower river reaches. But after fishermen blamed the beluga for reducing their catch, the government paid a bounty for each white whale killed. Though now protected, only 350 beluga remain. After a sighting by Jean-Michel Cousteau, the Calypso helicopter is sent aloft to film a record of the flashing beauty of these dying whales. For these two are doomed, the last 350. Their numbers reduced by killing, those remaining have been rendered sterile by the chemical pollutants discharged into the waters in which they gather. The St. Lawrence beluga are now technically extinct. Ghostly slim shadows beneath the seas, the river belugas are swiftly disappearing into an oblivion from which they will never again emerge. Now on the bridge of Calypso, Cusто and members of the team get word of one of the common incidents of the Newfoundland summer. Over the radio intercom, Falco reports that a trapped whale has been sighted from the helicopter. Returning to the landing pad on the ship's stern, Falco tells Cusто the precise location of the ensnared mammal in nearby Trepassey Bay on Newfoundland's southern coast. Within the hour, Custo dispatches a diving team to attempt a rescue. Reaching the captive whale, Delamont recognizes almost at once that it is a young calf, possibly still in its nursing period. Almost certainly the mother cannot be far away. Long known for the strong bonds of affection that unite them, mother and calf maintain frequent sound communication as they migrate. Jealously protective, the mother often will allow nothing between her and the calf. Cautious and watchful, Delamont and Capello go over the side to watch the young whale's plight from below. The divers quickly discover that the calf is fouled by the net, both at its jaw and its flippers. Luckily, the mammal is near the surface and is therefore still able to breathe. Though it must have dragged the net for at least several hundred yards, the net's grapnels have finally arrested its movement. Now, for an uncertain number of hours, the calf has remained fixed in place, breathing but growing steadily more exhausted and resigned. In mute torment, the great eye stares into a sea suddenly hostile and incomprehensible, filled with deadly restraints. As Delamont approaches, attempting to liberate the great animal from its bonds, the whale senses a new danger. Normally a gentle and even friendly creature, the humpback suddenly surges with fearful energy as it tries to ward off the divers. Watchful of the great flippers, the divers return to the surface. They confer briefly on a new strategy to soothe and reassure the young calf. Delamotte begins simply to caress the whale, passing his hand along its great flanks and head, gently stroking the folds above the watchful eye. Gradually, the calf begins to grow calmer. Yet, for Delamotte, too, there is a change. The calf is no longer an anonymous member of a species. It now has for him a new and friendly identity. On a whim, he gives it a vaguely Eskimo name. He calls it Yuki. For more than an hour, Delamotte continues his patient ministrations. At last, accustomed to the diver's presence, the calf remains docile as Delamotte approaches the great tangle of net and cables in which the calf's jaw and flippers are snared. But as he finally attempts to sever the line looped through Yuki's mouth, his knife is too small to cut the nylon rope. Holding the great weight of the net in its mouth, the calf lies quiet as Delamotte makes his second attempt to cut the restraining cable. Then, suddenly, it is done. After more than 2 hours of effort, Yuki is free. Yet the calf stays in place. Out of weariness or misunderstanding, still feeling the short length of cable left between its jaws, it remains immobilized, unaware that the trap is broken and it is free. Bruised and torn by all its straining efforts against the rope, the corners of the calf's mouth must be painfully sensitive. Yet Delamotte seizes the end of the cable fragment and tugs with all his strength. Then he is at the surface, his arm raised in triumph. As if at last understanding that it is free, the calf has begun to move. Yet briefly, Yuki seems almost reluctant to leave its rescuers. In some final courtesy, the calf permits Delamotte to climb upon its back. To share for a little while, whales frolic in the sea. Then, leaving its friends of a chance encounter, the calf is gone to where its mother waits, ready to resume its interrupted journey back to the Arctic, back into life.
For the rest of the day, mother and calf remain close by. Hour after hour, they roll and blow in joyous play. We have freed a whale. For a moment, we too have crossed the barriers that so often divide man from other living creatures. Most intelligent of species, man also is a master of self-deceit, eager to blame handy scapegoats for his own self-inflicted calamities. Quick to insist that his claims on the earth override all others, he ignores the fact that he is only part of a living whole. He forgets that he, no less than any other living thing, is also an experiment in survival. passengers on a small planet. En route to unknown landfalls we ourselves shall never see. We and a whale and calf have met in friendly chance encounter. Happily, we've been able to perform a vital service. It seems the least one fellow traveler could do for another.